A staggering 44 million Americans are on the brink of eviction due to unaffordable rental prices.
Here is back rent. So many families are struggling to catch up.
That's around 1 in 7 Americans who are struggling to keep a roof over their heads, and the situation is only getting worse. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to widespread job losses and financial hardships, making it difficult for families to make ends meet. Despite government efforts to provide relief, the reality is that millions of Americans are living in a state of constant uncertainty, unsure if they will have a place to call home tomorrow. If you think this sounds like a dystopian nightmare, unfortunately, it's the bleak reality that many people are facing in the United States today. Let's take a closer look at what has led to this looming disaster. The housing crisis in the United States is a multifaceted problem that cannot be attributed to a single cause. According to recent research by Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies and Moody's Analytics, rising mortgage rates have caused many households to be priced out of home buying, leading to a surge in apartment demand that has driven rental rates sky high. The disparity between rent growth and income growth has widened.
I can't go to work wondering when I'm asleep when I get out of work,
leaving renters in financial distress as wage growth trails rent growth. This, coupled with substantial gaps in wealth inequality, means that renters living in communities of colour and in high poverty, lower income and lower rent neighbourhoods are more likely to experience financial distress.
We are not building enough housing for everybody who needs a place to live.
Even if you aren't too much into finance, you have surely heard something about the FED raising interest rates. In a nutshell, higher interest rates mean that it is more expensive to borrow money, including for mortgages. This is because the higher rates increase the cost of borrowing, resulting in higher monthly mortgage payments. As a result, many would-be home buyers were priced out of the market, leading to a surge in demand for rental properties and driving rental prices higher. In addition to rising mortgage rates, there are other factors that have contributed to the housing crisis in the United States. One of the major issues is that houses and apartments are no longer looked at as homes, but as investments.
We are still so traumatized by the last housing crisis, we didn't put any investment into housing.
Wealthier people often buy up properties as investments, driving up prices and making it difficult for working-class families to afford a place to live.
Rising costs and expiring protections means renters are getting squeezed out.
Zoning laws also play a role in the housing crisis. Many cities have strict zoning laws that make it difficult to build affordable housing in certain areas. This leads to a shortage of affordable housing options, which drives up prices even further. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused significant economic disruptions across the United States, leading to job losses and financial hardships for many families. Many people who were already living paycheck to paycheck were hit hard by the pandemic and found themselves struggling to pay rent. The federal government passed a number of relief measures, including eviction moratoriums and financial assistance, to help alleviate some of the burdens on renters. However, these measures were often temporary and not enough to address the full extent of the crisis.
More than 11,000 eviction filings in St. Louis since March of 2020.
In addition to job losses and financial hardships, the pandemic also caused a surge in demand for rental properties.
The government has estimated that we are short about 4 million homes in this country, and that number is likely growing, especially since the pandemic,
driving up rental prices in many areas. With many people unable to afford their rent, eviction rates began to climb. On top of these pandemic-related issues, inflation has also contributed to the housing crisis. Inflation occurs when the general price level of goods and services in an economy increases over time. This means that the cost of living also increases, making it more difficult for families to make ends meet. Renters in the United States are facing unprecedented challenges due to rising rent prices.
They did, but those prices are coming down now because people just can't afford rent right now.
With mortgage rates soaring and demand for rental properties at an all-time high, it's becoming increasingly difficult for renters to find affordable housing. Recent data from Realtor.com shows that less than 6% of rental units are vacant across the country, and rent prices are still at historic highs despite recent declines in some areas. According to recent research by Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies and Moody's Analytics, rising mortgage rates have caused many households to be priced out of home buying, leading to a surge in apartment demand that has driven rental rates sky high.
Your more expensive metro areas are starting to see the biggest declines in rents.
The disparity between rent growth and income growth has widened, leaving renters in financial distress as wage growth trails rent growth. This, coupled with substantial gaps in wealth inequality, means that renters living in communities of colour and in high poverty, low income and lower rent neighbourhoods are more likely to experience financial distress. Low income earners are particularly affected by these rising rent prices, as they are forced to spend a significant portion of their income on housing. The National Housing Coalition estimates that low income workers need to spend about 55% of their income on rent for a one-bedroom rental, leaving little room for other necessities like food and transportation.
Things are so expensive that when you stay here, you can't even save up to.
Even middle-class households are struggling to keep up with rent prices, with many paying more than 40% of their income on rent. The dire situation for renters in the United States is further exacerbated by the threat of eviction. Despite some policies put in place during the pandemic to prevent evictions, eviction filings have already returned to pre-pandemic levels in some areas, putting many renters at risk of losing their homes.
10% from last year, which is really hurting low-income families.
A lack of affordable housing, poor wage growth, and a lack of federal state assistance for both landlords and low-income tenants has created a perfect storm, leaving many renters in a precarious financial situation. While the housing crisis in the United States is complex, there are potential solutions that could help alleviate some of the burdens on renters. The White House recently released a blueprint for a Renter's Bill of Rights, which includes provisions for safe, quality, accessible, and affordable housing, clear and fair leases, renter education and enforcement of renter rights, the right to organize, and eviction prevention, diversion, and relief. Additionally, the Department of Housing and Urban Development has allocated $20 million for its Eviction Protection Grant Program, which will fund nonprofits and government agencies to provide legal assistance to low-income tenants at risk of eviction. HUD is also moving towards requiring certain rental property owners to provide at least 30 days' notice if they plan to terminate the lease of a tenant due to non-payment of rent.
Blind back to the court because I don't know anything about it.
Local and state governments can also take action to address the housing crisis, such as implementing rent control policies or offering tax incentives to developers who build affordable housing. Non-profit organizations can also play a role in providing affordable housing solutions and legal assistance to renters facing eviction. However, with a divided nation along the political lines and harshest living conditions in decades, an easy way out of this solution is very unlikely. Ultimately, addressing the housing crisis in the United States will require a multifaceted approach that involves government policy, private sector action, and community involvement. Without meaningful solutions, the rental affordability crisis will continue to threaten millions of Americans and exacerbate the already dire housing insecurity of the homelessness crisis. We would love to hear your thoughts and experiences on this matter. Do you have any insight or stories to share? If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel for more informative content.